Now, to answer your question, well, in part, I'm not sure the atheism movement, I don't know what the state of it is now. We do know that the rise of the nuns continues. That is to say, the people that tick the box for no religious affiliation, none, in polls is continuing to grow. It's about a quarter of all Americans, about a third of all millennials. And it's probably going to end up being about half for all Gen Zers, although we don't have that data yet. And so, in other words, and I know,
I'm a consumer myself.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you are. That's right. And I know from evangelicals that I know, and the books that they send me for my podcast, that they're worried about this. To the evangelical, there is a catastrophe coming. That is, religion is falling into disuse in America, and we got to do something about it. Well, to me, this is good news. Okay, what's the problem? But of course, to them, that they see it quite differently. Now, so what happened after, I'll take you back a little bit to, let's go way back. So atheism was almost non-existent in David Hume's time. And there's a story about him and Adam Smith and a few others of this group, the Lunar Society of Birmingham, they were called, because they'd meet on the full moon so they could take their carriage rides back late at night with some light. And so they used to have conversations about these sorts of deep issues. And of course, Hume turns out to be one of the greatest thinkers of all time. And, he sort of politely announced that he thought he might be an atheist and perhaps the only one. And the others in the room apparently said something like, well, actually, shh, there's a bunch of us here. And, so it was pretty much non-existent at the time. Yeah. And, really wasn't until the early 20th century that it became, kind of acceptable, part of that whole humanist movement. And by the way, we're also an atheist. And then you could cite someone like Bertrand Russell and so on. And then into the 60s and 70s with the first challenges to mainstream religion from philosophy that were more public. And then the rise of the modern skeptical movement and modern humanist movement and humanist manifestos that were issued and so on. Then it became more of a social movement where there were groups and magazines and conferences that people could go to. And so it was kind of an exciting time. And I kind of stepped into all that in the 1980s. And then in 1992, we founded Skeptic Magazine. And here's our latest issue with, I should say parenthetically, that this woman here, Pat Lindsay, was my co-founder and partner, and she just died in July. And so, 30 years. Yeah, 30 years of doing this. And, preceding us were people like James Randi and Martin Gardner, Paul Kurtz, Ray Hyman, and others that founded the modern skeptical movement. But also within that was the humanist movement. And all that was gaining steam in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. And then Richard's book, The God Delusion, was 2006. And of course, that was a top bestseller, sold millions of copies. That book sold more copies of an atheist book than probably all other atheist books combined total ever, cumulatively. And
probably double
millions of copies. And so that, then Richard launched the Richard Dawkins Foundation. And so there was a lot of momentum there. And then, but a few years after, so the initial split was, to what extent are you militant atheist versus more of a kind of a milquetoast atheist, to follow the M sequence there, or, just something like, are you more conciliatory or are you more aggressive? And since I was more on the conciliatory side, perhaps more along the lines of Stephen Jay Gould, although his arguments have some flaws. But in any case, I got some heat for that. I thought, we're all in the same club. Why are you giving me a hard time for saying not everybody needs to be like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens? There's several strategies to take, and it'd be better if we had a big tent. So that was the initial split. Then the next split after that was Atheist Plus movement. The plus is social justice. And so what's the dates around that? Maybe 2010, 2011, that starts to take off. But worse than that was this purging. If you're not a social justice warrior or activist or whatever, you're not in the plus part of Atheist Plus, then you're not a real atheist, or you're not a true humanist, or you're not in our camp, you're not on our team. And again, it's like, people, we're still in the minority, and you're dividing people up and kicking people out and purging. This is a bad idea.
On being successful. When we just got started on being successful. And so I actually want to comment on a bunch of things of what you just said, because you really hit it out of the park, to give an actual baseball reference. I remember being in organized atheism when it was fairly healthy and seeing that divide between the firebrands or the militant ones and the diplomats. There was, you had groups like the American Humanist Association, for instance, that wanted to be a little more milquetoast. Understandable. They thought, okay, we can reach out to a larger audience that maybe didn't want to be on the front lines of a theological conflict. And then, of course, there were people who wanted to mirror Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, people like my friend David Silverman, who's also an advisor on for Atheists for Liberty. So I get that. There should have never been any division. We should have seen this from, in my opinion, a strategic perspective. We'll have some people go on the front lines. We'll have some people support us in the back and get more people. But we didn't do that, and it was a big shame. And of course, with Atheism Plus, of course, with these, I would argue, infiltrators coming into this community, you had these folks saying, if you're not on board the social justice train, if you don't support us on issues unrelated to the original New Atheist mission for secularism, for reason, for human rights, for the normalization of atheism, then you need to get kicked out. And I've faced the consequences of that. I got kicked out of Americans United for Separation of Church and State's Youth Advisory Council, for instance, for merely launching this organization. And that was at least the nail on the coffin for me. But
Really?
I think 2016 was kind of the death blow of that. I was at Reason Rally 2, a repeat of the original event. I was 18 years old, just graduated high school, and I was looking around at this event. I'm like, where's the 30,000 that was there in 2012 in the rain? It's sunny. We're by the Lincoln Memorial. We have more resources. We have more clout. What happened? And there was only one organizer that ended up truthfully telling me, whispering into my ear at the time, what happened. And he said 2 words, Thomas: social justice.